Hello, everyone. And in this lecture, we'll be doing part 2 of Latin America. So let's begin. Let me go over to the slides. Sorry about that. Still trying to find it. Okay, so this is what we're going to be covering in this lecture. We're going to be looking at medical diplomacy, civil military relations, populism, feminism and patriarchy of the state, human security, that is the capacity of the state to deal with domestic violence and gang violence, rentier warlordism is just a fancy way of referring to the drug cartels, who more or less are warlords who charge a rent on drugs. And that's what makes the drug cartels in Mexico part of this term that's called rentier warlordism. And then we're going to be looking at indigenous peoples in Latin America. So let's begin. We already went through the videos. These are Russian planes that came to the aid of Italy during its worst phase of the pandemic in February and March 2020. And with the delivery of medical equipment, Russia was sending a message to Italy that if the US, NATO, or the European Union have failed so far to come to your aid, we will be there. What is Russia saying? Well, Russia is also saying to its rivals in the US, NATO, and the EU, you failed to come to Italy's aid. Look how fast we were able to mobilize our medical support for this country. It's the same dynamic when we see the Cuban doctors landing on the tarmac. Both of these examples are medical diplomacy. Cuba has a very advanced medical education system. And one of its ways of generating revenues, well, Cuba generates revenues in two ways. Tourism is primarily, but also having a kind of well-equipped, well-trained medical diplomatic brigade that often goes abroad to, on one level, help it during medical crises, but then also kind of improve the image of Cuba wherever it goes to countries in aid. So what are we seeing here are the Cuban doctors in Italy. And basically, what is this image saying? Again, who is Cuba's ultimate rival? It's the US. And basically it's saying to the US, well, you failed to come to the aid of this particular European country. We mobilize to its defense. And then if we look at this image, what are we seeing here? An image that would have been unthinkable during the Cold War. Okay, why is this image important? First of all, the figures on the left lifting the Italian flag, that's the Italian health sector. And what did we say about the Italian security sector? What did we say of the security sector? So the security sector includes the police, the military, and then in various countries, other armed units that work on behalf of the state. The necessity of the security sector during a pandemic is this: they have the expertise in guarding borders. They are the ones who transport the medical equipment. If we look at all previous, those are military planes coming from Russia. That's the Russian security sector coming to Italy's aid, okay? And so in this case, a picture like this would be unthinkable during the Cold War. Italy was a member of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Cuba was part of the Soviet alliance. Okay. Now, after the Cold War, what are we seeing? Armed members of the Italian security sector, technically as members of NATO, okay, with the Cuban health sector. So what does a picture like this represent? The kind of how much geopolitics has changed since the end of the Cold War. But it's also sending a message as well that Italy was under attack and Cuba came to its defense. Now, of course, the Italian state would have been paying for these Cuban health brigades. That's how desperate the Italian health sector was for their support. Okay. But nonetheless, this was really the first, major international country to come to mobilize for Italy's defense. Okay. Now we get to Brazil. What is populism? Well, it's exemplified by a picture here. Here we have Jair Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, basically appealing to the masses. And what is the kind of major message of any populist leader is trust me, not the experts. The experts are for part of your problems. They're the bureaucrats, they're the deep state, so on and so forth. So that was Bolsonaro's appeal, all right? Now, he also, like President Trump, recommended taking a synthetic drug called chloroquine, which is used to treat malaria for COVID-19. This was now let's go back to the science. The only thing that could fight a virus is a vaccine, which is just a dead virus. It's a just dead part of the virus. That's the only way you can fight a virus. An anti-malarial drug that is designed to kill. Malaria is a parasite. Okay, it's a microscopic organism. Completely two different categories of pathogens. Now, scientists in Brazil who criticized the administration of this drug were receiving death threats. Okay, the health sector was receiving death threats as a result of really doing their job, spreading medical information, fighting medical disinformation. And if you ever want kind of an image of populism, well, here it is. The masses coming out on the street in defense of Bolsonaro, protesting against the quarantine measures. So what was the problem? Bolsonaro wouldn't enforce lockdowns, basically argued the Brazilian economy can't afford it. And then what happened? So the necessary measures to prevent COVID in Brazil were not taken. And COVID eventually reached Brazil and it hit hard, pushing Brazil to number 2 in terms of infections on a global level. Okay. Now, the Bolsonaro's argument that the economy couldn't take the hit, well, what happened is, so he kept the economy open, a lot of people died, and the economy still crashed. And this is according to Brazilian scientists, what I'm quoting here. The Brazilian scientists and economists would have basically, across the board, argue this. If the lockdown measures would have been put in place, it would have been much less of an economic hit than what Brazil is now going through. In other words, staying open, and then with staying open, letting the virus flow, and then giving it so much ability to spread that Brazil became number 2. Now what you have, it's not that just Brazil's economy is hit. There is mass starvation in Brazil as a result of this decision. Upwards estimates as a result of the pandemic, maybe 55% of the population is food insecure. In other words, they don't know where their next meal is going to come from. That number was probably in the 30s prior to the pandemic. So what are we going to do now? We're going to go to an interactive set of images provided by the New York Times, a good example of digital journalism. Okay, so here we go. Let's just navigate this. So this is how it looks on the computer. And we'll just scroll down. Just to show you the kind of makeshift graveyard that emerged. Let's work down, just look at the faces. This is the Amazon, the virus spreading along the Amazon. This is the Brazilian health sector. And then, look what we do, we could zoom in, we're gonna fly into, okay, look at where Manaus is. Manaus is one of the largest cities in the Amazon. And it was brought by somebody who had traveled from England. And then from Manaus, let's just see how it spread. So basically, what is it spreading along with boats and planes, modern means of transportation? And of course, these villages, 3.6 times higher than the national death rate. These villages don't have a health sector, so to speak. Sorry, went in the wrong direction. Okay, there we go. And that's the modern means of transportation, which allowed the virus to spread. Oops, get those people avoid. And yeah, how do you get tested? Okay, most of us take mass transportation to get to a testing site. So did these guys, are mass transportation at these boats. And yeah, this is what a testing site in Brazil would look like. And in this case, remember, this is such a remote location that you can't have the security sector come out. You basically, by necessity, you give it to civilian teams to take care of the deceased. And this is a problem world over, the need to create new burial grounds to accommodate the dead. And again, this is the health sector of Brazil. The health sector creating kind of a makeshift. Modern transportation, the modern infrastructure has to bring in the disinfectants. And again, just images of the Brazilian health sector. And again, because there are mass transportation, like I said, it's not highways. There's no highways. So you either get to these remote areas in the Amazon by a boat or plane. This is how the modern kind of traverses distances over the pre-modern jungles of the Amazon. Oops. And these are indigenous peoples of Brazil. These native indigenous peoples, first, of course, a lot of them would have been killed off with the European diseases, in this case, brought by the Portuguese. And it's just a great image of the kind of how the pre-modern traditions still prevail. Yeah, these ferries, these are long trips. I mean, the Amazon is huge. And yeah, that's the health sector. Just look how overwhelmed it is. Yeah, just more pictures of the Brazilian health sector. Okay. And do you see what this article is saying? Brazil's health workers may have spread the coronavirus to indigenous people. That's also the other challenge. Okay. Leave that later. Let's go back to the lecture. Okay. Now we get to Mexico. What is Mexico's president failing to do here in terms of the policy cycle? The failure to address domestic violence in this case is the failure to set the agenda. And when you fail to do that, you're not implementing policy to prevent domestic abuse. So let's look at this problem. Okay. You see, the minute number one doesn't occur, then there's no number two. Then three through six never happens. You let the problem of domestic abuse in Mexico just then continue. If I take these sentences from that New York Times article, okay. Number one, when you fail to is that New York Times, by the way? Yeah, this was a New York Times. Okay, outright deny, that's failing to set the agenda. Okay. The woman, Wendy, is the head of what we would call a civil society organization. When the state fails, these kind of organizations that come from society, that's what we call civil society, come in to fill in the void. What did his administration do is create, and we're going to look at this, a publicity campaign to urge would-be abusers to not lose patience, breathe, and count to 10. Okay. If it's ridicule, that means that's the policy they chose. Okay. And that's then number 5, evaluation. It wasn't really effective. Now look at this. 77% increase after the lockdown of women and children seeking protection. This is April 2020, 11 women being murdered per day. So let's look at this. What's happening here in the case of this woman, Diana, is the following. The state, when we say patriarchy of the state is a body that's patriarchal. In that sense, it is not prioritizing the protection of women. And in this case, Ms. Raigosa was a victim of the state failing. In this case, it's the failure of biopower, the failure to protect the health, the human security of an individual woman. You see how this is kind of, when we look at the urban risk society, look at these living conditions. And if that's where you're going to be locked down, okay, it's not surprising. I mean, it's not surprising that abusive partners are going to take out their frustration on the more vulnerable in the relationship. I'm saying not surprising. It's not surprising for the government. The government should have anticipated this problem, created resources where women were able to get in contact with some kind of authority, health, security sector, police, so on and so forth. But in Mexico, the security sector, what we're going to see, it is in a abysmal shape. It's an abysmal shape. Okay. And yeah, during the pandemic, violence against women continued to be a problem. This is in Ciudad Juarez by the border with Texas. And this was in March 2020 for International Women's Day. Now, the problem was, of course, this would also then, protesting violence against women, a serious problem, but this would have also been a super spreader event. And this is the exam image, because what is it? So let me just translate it for you. The hashtag is stay at home, the command, right? Don't lose patience, breathe and count to 10. And then here you have the website of the coronavirus, go be out and know. So what do we see here? So in other words, the fighting, and then the woman counted to 10 and she's smiling, all is good. Okay, what's the problem with this number? So let's look at it. First, this is an example of the state trying to maintain we could call it trying to maintain security by just saying it's up to you not to cause harm to each other. In reality, how often does this happen? So number one, again, when we look at this exam image, let's look at Machiavelli. When somebody abuses a partner, they don't fear the state. They don't fear the repercussions. They let their violence and temper get a hold of them. That overrides their fear of the state. Now, in this case, in Mexico, they know they can get away with it because the state is almost not present. One doesn't feel the state in its presence. Okay? In other words, somebody could commit abuse knowing that no penalties will be faced. Okay? That's one level. This ad is patriarchal. What do I mean by that? It's patriarchal in the sense it's probably designed by men who have no clue what domestic abuse looks like. Okay. It's not simply like this case in this smiling abuela, grandmother, mother, just saying, okay, I counted to 10, problem solved. Okay. So that's what we mean by it's patriarchal. It doesn't recognize the problem. Basically, what would a mass media campaign, and that's what makes it modern, need to look like during this lockdown? Basically, what are the resources that women have to seek help? What ways could they go to a pharmacy, for example, and have the pharmacist call in help? How to find information about the closest shelter? And when they say call 911, actually have police come, number one, and then punish the perpetrator. You see, all of that was absent in this campaign. Then you have the digitalist visit our website, assuming everyone has the ability to access Wi-Fi and visit this website. That's a problem. When we talk about the policy cycle, this already right there, I would say I've evaluated it and found so many problems with it. Then we get to the other problem, organized crime and the coronavirus in Mexico. So let's look at this. So I'm just taking the headlines and the various images. Look at this aid that the drug cartels are providing and compare it. Here you have the government website, and here you have a website for elchapoguzman.com. The drug cartels have gone digital. You see what is happening. This particular woman, just like in Brazil, hunger is skyrocketing because the economy has collapsed. And when the state is not built, okay, the drug cartels step in. Look at this front page from the New York Times article I sent you. And this could be the exam image as well. Because if you see, look at the masks, look at the food, aid, okay? And again, what does this represent? Okay, like I said, the drug cartel is a warlord organization. They have weapons, they control territory, that what makes them a warlord, and they charge a rent on drugs. Okay? Basically, drugs aren't like a finished product like an automobile. You more or less take a natural resource, refine it, and sell it. Okay, you're charging a rent on that natural resource. That's what makes it a rent instead of charging a profit on a final product like a car. Besides the various drugs, okay, so that's what are they taking part in? The mass distribution of drugs, particularly to the US. Now, what happens with a pandemic? Okay, like I said, when the state fails to come to the aid of the population of Mexico, the drug cartel come in, you see. And again, why is this important for this modern day epidemic? Notice this is also about the drug cartel trying to get legitimacy and acceptance amongst the population. Via digitalism, via its website. Okay. So, what is the drug cartel then? What does this image represent? The combination of the security sector. The drug cartels are the security sector in the areas they control. They're the guys with the guns. The security sector, that's called the police, are more or less infiltrated by the drug cartels. And on some ends, when they start providing masks like this, they almost become kind of a quasi-health sector. When they provide water, the stuff of life, that's the health sector. And then what is the other problem? Is a lot of people in Mexico have what we call comorbidities, okay? They have a predisposition to gain coronavirus, okay? And what is the problem? It's another form of American influence in Mexico. These processed, sugary, soft drinks, you see, with NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Organization, Mexico opened up to goods produced in the US, a lot of it with high fructose corn syrup. Now, for Mexico's population, particularly, let's look at this. Before 1492, a Mexican could not drink this. Why is that? There's a couple of things in this jarritos. Number one, a lot of sugar. No sugar was grown in North or South America before the Europeans came. It wasn't a native plant. Number two, no citrus drinks. What does that mean? That means since the beginning of history till 1492, native inhabitants of Mexico, Brazil, North America for that matter, never evolved to process sugar. They never had this kind of long evolutionary process, which means, of course, people from indigenous heritage from Mexico and North America are very susceptible to diabetes. And diabetes that's what we call a comorbidity. Your health is compromised. And that's what makes you particularly vulnerable then to contracting COVID-19. The remainder of the slides are just basically brief sentences from the reading. But I discussed everything I needed to discuss. Very good.